The AAA first-person shooter genre has gotten incredibly stale in recent years. Monoliths like Halo, Call of Duty, and Battlefield have, over the last 10 years or so, put out games that are at best serviceable and somewhat enjoyable, and at worst, just complete dumpster fires. And of course, there have been great big-budget shooters over that span too. The new Doom games are, in my opinion, the greatest shooters of all time. Wolfenstein had a nice little run in the 2010s, and Titanfall 2 is a game that I constantly come back to. I don't want to discredit these games or act like everything is worse now, gaming sucks. There's still plenty of fun to be had. But it's no secret that generally speaking, the largest companies and publishers have been dropping the ball with this genre. But the indie scene is a much different story. There are bad indie shooters as well, but it's a lot easier to ignore them or never even hear of them. And when you start looking at the ones that are actually well worth your time, you realize that one of these is coming out practically every month. So today I wanted to talk about some of my favorite indie shooters. This isn't an exhaustive list by any stretch, and I plan on doing at least one more of these in the future because there's so much good stuff coming out. But hopefully you'll find at least a few games to add to your wishlist if you're a fan of this genre. Their Steam listings are in the description. Also, this list is kind of stupid because it features a few games that aren't actually first person, which, you know, seems kind of important for a video about first person shooters. But I wanted to add them because I think if you like the FPS genre, you'll also like the third person shooters that I cover here, and they usually play more like FPSs than standard third person shooters anyways. Look, you can argue with me, but honestly, I just wanted to show you some cool games, so just strap in, alright? Let's start with a few fast twitch shooters. Severed Steel is a game where style is the substance. To avoid taking damage, you not only need to be on the move, but you need to slide, dive, and wall run to dodge bullets. It's really frantic, and I feel like most of the time I'm barely even making coherent movements while I'm playing, but it still manages to make me feel like a decked out cyber assassin. Levels get progressively more creative and intricate, but never get too big, and you're able to tackle them in a bunch of different ways, eventually optimizing your route and creating a full-on action sequence. The amount of freedom that you're given with the camera and the movement can be really overwhelming at first, especially if you haven't practiced your mouse and keyboard dexterity skills, but once you get the hang of it, it gives you more control over your movement than really any other first-person game I've played. But if you're looking for something that has a little bit less of a learning curve but is just as quick and fluid, you should check out I Am Your Beast. This is a very recent game from a dev team that actually has another entry later on this list. I like its dark, simplistically presented story that's told entirely through big-ass subtitles and walkie-talkie conversations. The meat of this game is a series of short levels that almost feel like obstacle courses, where you switch between weapons and kill creatively as quickly as you can until you hit the exit. Levels are incredibly short, you can realistically beat each one in under a minute, even close to the end, and while I wouldn't mind if there were some longer encounters, the focused level design really does feed into that John Wick fantasy. It doesn't feature the same twisting body movements of Severed Steel, which makes it a lot more accessible in my opinion, but it's still something that you have to learn to master over time. And maybe my favorite game in this subgenre is Neon White, just for how unique of a concept it is. This game really consumed my life for a little bit. I was just constantly engaged in a battle with my brother over who could have the fastest level times. The skill gap with Neon White is insane. Levels that could take a minute and a half for some people might take 8 seconds for a pro, but I genuinely think reaching that upper level of skill is attainable for most players. This is the first game that made me genuinely feel like a speedrunner, exploiting specific shortcuts in the levels and learning how to use its incredibly simple but genius discard system, where the cards you pick up double as weapons and as movement abilities. The experience of discovering different routes and finding optimal ways to use your cards is so much fun, and even though I was a little bit worried that this game would be too hardcore for me before I bought it, it won me over like basically instantly. The dating sim stuff can be a little rough though. Let's move on to some throwback boomer shooters. Forgive Me Father has one of the most interesting art styles out of this entire group of games. It's got this comic-y, cardboardy, cosmic horror aesthetic that looks intentionally off in a way that really grabs your attention. It's got a slower, more methodical loop than the games I just mentioned, and I wish it had a bit more variety when it came to enemy attacks, but the core gameplay is super stellar and the visual identity goes a long way in making this a memorable experience. There's also a sequel to this game that's in early access, which looks like an even more polished take on the same idea with even more kick to it. I haven't played it myself yet, but it's definitely on my radar, so this entry is a 2-for-1 deal. If any game that I've played feels like a real spiritual successor to the OG FPS games like Doom and Wolfenstein though, it's gotta be Proteus. It's been a while since I've played this one. It was actually in early access when I played it, but it stuck with me throughout the years. It has such a weirdly retro yet modern look to it because of the unique post-processing stuff that they do to the models, something that you can actually turn down a little bit if it's not your style, but I honestly don't know why it wouldn't be. It's bloody, messy, and laid out in a similar maze-like structure as the old Doom games, which makes it retro in more just its looks and pace. This kind of feels like playing those older games with rose-tinted glasses, and I'm excited to boot it up again now that it's moved on from early access. Warhammer 40k Bolt Gun is a game with a big franchise name attached to it, but the developer behind it is an independent team, and what they produced here is a crazy polished retro shooter with tons of unique encounter designs and a great assortment of weapons. distance. It does show its hand a little bit early with its enemies, with most of its variety being front-loaded, but my god if it isn't snappy and stylish while also being a little bit easier on the eyes than some of these other takes on 3D retro graphics. They found some way to limit the eye strain that some of these other games have over time. It is part of a greater universe, but you don't need to know about that to hop into this. It was actually my first Warhammer game, and now I'm enjoying the hell out of Space Marine 2, so bonus points for being such a simple introduction to the franchise. Also, this isn't an indie game or first person for that matter, but play Space Marine 2, it's awesome. How about a mix of these two subgenres, fast twitch boomer shooters? You just can't make a list like this without Ultrakill. It has turned into a total cult hit, it has a massive fan base, and for good reason. It is so liberal with its wacky movement and ability set that it really feels like a massive shooter playground, with the aggressive methods of healing really pushing you into the action, and newer levels have introduced new novel mechanics that force you to approach encounters in very strategic ways, all while moving incredibly quickly through levels. Ultrakill is a game that I'm insanely bad at, but I still love it because it's just pure chaotic fun, and it's the most popular game on this list for a reason. I feel like Boomerang X didn't get the love it deserved, to the point that the studio behind it actually had to shut down, and that really sucks because it was definitely a little bit short and more limited in features than a lot of other games on here, but that was the whole charm of it. Everything was tied to this boomerang, from the way you moved to the way that you did damage. There's no traditional ammo system in this game, and its greatest strength is all the unconventionally shaped levels that force you to use your boomerang in unique ways to survive. It squeezes all the quality it can from this concept, and I love when a game can do that and then end before it gets to be too much of a chore, and Boomerang X nailed that fresh, off-the-wall feeling for a really enjoyable few hours. I wish this game found more of an audience than it did, and we saw the studio make more games like this, and it's just a real bummer that we won't. But hopping from one of the most stripped down games on this list to maybe the most feature complete, let's talk about Turbo Overkill. I don't hear this game talked about as much as I feel like it should be. It's fairly meaty for a game like this. It's got a ton of fun ways to take out enemies and move around levels. The levels are huge and semi-open, and there's a few moments where the game just tries out a wholly new concept just for the hell of it. It's such a diverse gameplay experience, and it's really solid performance-wise too. And even though Ultrakill feels like it's the bigger revolution in the indie shooter genre, if I was to make just a blanket recommendation for a fun, fast-paced retro shooter, I think Turbo Overkill would be at the top of my list. It's that good. We've also been seeing a few first-person roguelikes crop up. Gunfire Reborn is a great one. It's really the answer to what if Borderlands was a roguelike, and not just in visual design, but in the emphasis put on weapons as well. There are a whole bunch of cool weapons to mess around with, and some of the effects they come with are insanely overpowered. There's also co-op support, which is always welcome, and even though its levels can feel a little straightforward, especially with their lack of verticality, the tight gameplay, bosses, and wacky guns are more than enough to make this something that I've found myself coming back to at regular intervals since I got it a few months back. Also, and this is one of the non-first person entries on this list, but I have to give a shout out to Crab Champions, which is a game made by the guy who made the Crab Rave meme. Yeah, that's real, that's not a joke. The way abilities stack in this game and how crowded arenas can get escalates encounters to a point where your screen is basically just fireworks and your crab moving at the speed of sound. It's incredible. It is such a simple system at its core, but your progression route makes you feel like a god during some of these runs. And I haven't even unlocked most of the weapons in this game yet. It's still in early access, so I'm sure we'll see it become even more feature complete soon, which is nice because my one complaint is that the level and arena variety is pretty low. But even with that, this is some of the most pure dumb fun I've had with a shooter in a long time. And Witchfire is a game that I'll admit I haven't played yet myself, but it's been calling my name for a while. It opts for a much more realistic aesthetic than a lot of these games, but it also has a heavy focus on magic, and gunplay by all accounts is heavy in a good way, like the way you're supposed to feel with old school weaponry. The gunplay being great shouldn't be a surprise to anybody considering the people behind this game had a huge hand in developing Bulletstorm, but their ability to combine that gameplay acumen with these deadly medieval fantasy looking enemies in a rich, dark setting makes Witchfire seem like something that could really make a splash once it completes its early access period. And the last subgenre I want to cover here is a bit of a weirder one, rhythm first-person shooters. BPM, Bullets Per Minute, was the first rhythm shooter I ever played, and it instantly convinced me that this genre was worth buying into. Just like the last few games, this is also a roguelike, but it asks you to shoot, reload, and dash to the tempo of the music, which makes it so hard, but so insanely satisfying when you do clear out a room with perfect timing. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of this game, even though I've been playing it on and off for a few years, because I'm just not good at it at all, but the soundtrack slaps so hard that I haven't even minded that for me, it's basically just 2 songs. Metal Hellsinger is much more forgiving than BPM is, and it's also not a roguelike, which might make it a better entry point for most people into this particular subcategory of shooter. You can technically shoot off beat, but the better your timing, the more your points and combo grow, and also the more dense the music becomes, starting with a simple foundation of a metal track, and eventually, if you play well enough, moving up to an absolutely blasting instrumental and grungy vocals. It is so gratifying seeing your performance being directly reflected in the soundtrack itself, and even if the rhythm element that makes this game so great was removed, this would still be a more than serviceable shooter campaign filled with unique bosses and tightly constructed levels. And a game that feels like one of the best intersections of all the genres we've talked about here is RoboBeat. It features very stripped back graphics, has a wider range of movement options than some of the more grounded, classic-inspired shooters, and of course, being in this section, it encourages actions to be performed to the beat playing behind the level. This is one that I've had a little bit less time with than a lot of others on here, but I had a blast playing through what I did, and I'm excited to keep going because it features just about everything I like in a shooter. I am hoping for more adventurous level design as it goes on, but the basics of monkeying around and blasting enemies to a synthwave soundtrack is something that's fun no matter what the setting is, so I can't imagine it'll get old either way. A little bonus game that I wasn't sure where to put, also not first person, is El Paso Elsewhere. This was made by the same devs behind I Am Your Beast, and it's a Max Payne inspired vampire killing escapade that moves faster than you'd expect and lets you play around with a ton of different slow motion and dive effects. The story being told here isn't the most groundbreaking, but it's got a bold attitude matched with strange, horror-fueled enemy encounters, and there's even a short, fully horror experience in the same universe called El Paso Nightmare, which I enjoyed for what it was, which is basically just a 20-minute retro spookfest followed by an endless maze shooter. I've been working my way through El Paso Elsewhere, and I think it's a great little spiritual successor to Max Payne if that was something that you've been feeling an itch for recently. Anyways, like I said, this is not an exhaustive list of all the indie FPS games out there. I'm sure I'll do another video like this soon, but these are some that I've had the most fun with over the last few years. Let me know some of your favorites in the comments. Make sure to check out my main channel, it's on the screen right now, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.